What if you woke up one morning and the internet was quiet? Imagine it. You were lying in bed. The first light is filtering through your window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. You do what you always do. You reach for your phone. Your thumb, acting on a decade of muscle memory, swipes, taps, opens the app. The one with the bird, maybe, or the one with the ghosts, or the endless scroll of faces you half recognize. But this chimmy, the scroll doesn't happen. There's no fresh outrage. No beautifully filtered breakfast. No algorithmically perfected video of a dog befriending a cat. There's just a simple, sterile error message, written in a stark, universal font. Connection reset by peer. You try another app. Same message. You switch from Wi-Fi to cellular. Same message. A flicker of annoyance, the kind you get when a server is down. You'll check again in 5 minutes. But in Tokyo, a teenager trying to post a sunrise photo from her balcony sees the same words. In a cafe in Nairobi, a journalist trying to upload a report gets the same cold digital refusal. In a dorm room in Ohio, a student scrolling for a dopamine hit before class hits the same dead end. It's not a bug, it's not a server crash. It's the end. The day the global chorus of social media was deliberately and permanently silenced. Settle in wherever you are right now. Just take a second. What time is it for you? Is it late? Can you hear the rain outside? I like to think of us sitting here together in the quiet, just exploring an idea. If you enjoy these little trips into the speculative dark, a small click on the subscribe button is like leaving a light on for a fellow It helps. Now, back to the silence. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event born of war or solar flares. It was worse. It was bureaucratic. It arrived via a press release. They called it the International Digital Wellness Accord, a landmark agreement signed by 172 nations after years of escalating crises. Remember those years? The Great Correction, they called it in the history books, a period defined by a creeping, low-grade societal fever. It was a slow burn of mental health epidemics, of teenagers with the anxieties of seasoned stockbrokers. It was the sophisticated AI-driven election meddling that made the primitive bots of the 2020s look like children's toys. It was the near miss in the South China Sea, a conflict almost sparked not by a stray missile, but by a viral deepfake of a naval commander issuing a stand-down order. The world's governments, in a rare and terrifying moment of agreement, decided the experiment was over. The human brain, they concluded, was simply not equipped for the relentless, weaponized social architecture it had been subjected to for 2 decades. The pressure was too high. The global nervous system was about to snap. So they flipped the switch. It was an engineering feat of breathtaking scale, a kind of digital Hoover Dam. Not a ban on apps from an app store that would be too easy to circumvent. This was a protocol-level blockade, a coordinated global firewall enforced by every major internet service provider on the planet. From Comcast to China Telecom, they simply made the digital pathways that led to the servers of Meta, of ByteDance, of Xvanish, and the architects of these worlds. The tech giants and their sprawling Silicon Valley campuses, they didn't fight. In the greatest pivot in corporate history, they embraced it. They rebranded overnight. They became pioneers of ethical technology and offline wellness, selling digital detox retreats, and beautifully designed, minimalist dumb phones. They had seen the writing on the wall, and it was written in the ink of antitrust legislation and crippling liability lawsuits. It was cheaper to become the saviors than to remain the villains. Admit it, there's a dark, cynical part of you that's almost impressed. For the first 48 hours, the world didn't panic. It troubleshooted billions of people. A global army of amateur IT technicians rebooted their routers. They cleared their caches. They Googled while they still could. Why is Instagram not working? The search results were just government landing pages calmly explaining the new reality. The silence was a novelty. On subway cars, people looked up, blinking in the unfamiliar light, making accidental eye contact and quickly looking away. The phantom buzz in your pocket. You remember that feeling, don't you? That ghost of a notification. For a week, an entire planet felt a limb that was no longer there. But the real horror wasn't the silence itself. It was the vacuum it created. You see, for 2 decades, we had outsourced our social identity, our triumphs, our heartbreaks, our mundane observations. They were only real once they were posted, validated by likes, shares, and comments from people we barely knew. We had an audience for our lives 24/7. And then, in a single, coordinated instant, the audience was gone. The stage was empty, the lights were off, and billions of performers were left standing alone in the dark with a lifetime of unshared thoughts rattling around in their skulls. The initial relief of the quiet was beginning to fade, and a new feeling was creeping in. The terrifying, claustrophobic dread of being utterly, completely, and finally unobserved. The great silence had arrived, and in that silence, new voices were starting to learn how to whisper. The question wasn't what we had lost. It was what was coming to fill the void. The first week was a planetary detox. The second week was when the seizures began. Not literal physical seizures. Not for most people. Anyway, this was something deeper. A violent, involuntary twitching of the psyche. You feel it in your jaw first. A dull, persistent ache from clenching your teeth in your sleep. You find yourself standing in front of the mirror, practicing expressions. A slight, knowing smile. A look of thoughtful concern. A carefully constructed frown of intellectual disagreement. You're rehearsing, but the performance has been cancelled. The muscle memory of portraying yourself is so deeply ingrained that your body goes through the motions, even without a camera to capture it. The silence is no longer a novelty. It's a presence. Wait. Sits at the dinner table with your family, where conversations that once flowed, buffered by the sharing of a funny video or a shocking headline, now stall and die in awkward, suffocating pockets of quiet. You realize, with a cold dread, that you don't actually know how to talk to these people without a screen to triangulate the conversation. You've forgotten the language of undivided attention. In the office, the change is even more pronounced. Subtle hierarchies, once reinforced by follower counts and online influence, have evaporated. Suddenly, the quiet, competent middle manager who had a negligible online presence is the one people look to. The 24-year-old marketing prodigy who built a career on viral campaigns is just he sits in meetings, his face a mask of anxious he has brilliant ideas for a world that no longer exists. It turns out, 1 million followers doesn't neatly convert into a transferable job skill outside of, perhaps, cult leadership. And that market was about to get very, very crowded. This is the visceral reality of the Great Correction. The first wave of the fallout wasn't riots in the streets, it was a tsunami of termination emails. An entire global industry, the multi-trillion-dollar apparatus of digital advertising and influence, had been declared obsolete overnight. Social media managers, content moderators, the silent janitors of our collective filth, SEO specialists, engagement analysts, and the influencers, God, the influencers. An entire generation of entrepreneurs whose sole commodity was their own curated existence, now faced with the terrifying prospect of a private life. They were pilots without a plane, chefs without a kitchen, millions of people, suddenly and brutally unemployed, holding resumes that read like a dead language. You'd think there'd be some sympathy, wouldn't you? But there isn't. There's a quiet, vicious satisfaction that settles over the general population. A collective shock. Nobody weeps for the king when the castle disappears. But the human need for validation is a stubborn, primal thing. It's a hunger. And a starving person will eat whatever they can find. If the official sanitized supermarkets of attention are closed, you don't simply stop being hungry. You go looking for the black market, and it begins, as it always does, in the margins. Small, desperate, and deeply human. It starts with the witnesses. That's the name whispered in encrypted chat rooms and on the decentralized networks that sprung up like weeds in the cracks of the old internet. It's a simple, pathetic transaction. You pay someone not to interact with you, not to flatter you, but simply to watch you. A former lifestyle vlogger in Seoul pays a trio of laid-off gig workers to follow her through the Namdaemun market. They don't speak to her, they just observe. Their phones are out, but the cameras are dead. They're just props. Their job is to create the feeling of an audience, to bear witness to her day, to nod when she tries on a hat, to look impressed when she barters for a piece of silk. She's paying for the phantom limb to feel real again. In London, a disgraced political commentator, once famous for his incendiary live streams, now rents a small, soundproofed room by the hour. In it are 5 chairs, occupied by 5 silent figures. He pays in cash. He just talks. He rants, he preaches, he delivers his takes on a world that can no longer hear him. They don't have to agree. They don't have to applaud. Their only job is to provide him with a target for his own voice, to give his words a place to land. You think that's insane? Be honest with yourself for just a second, here in the quiet. Haven't you ever framed the perfect witty thought, looked down at your useless phone, and felt a pang of genuine loss that you couldn't share it? A sense that a part of your experience was now incomplete, wasted. This is where the real horror begins to germinate. Not in the silence, but in the frantic, clumsy, and increasingly expensive ways people were trying to break it. An entire economy was being born in the shadows, built on the simple, terrifying premise that to be unobserved is to be unreal. And like any unregulated market, this new economy of attention was developing its own predators, its own cartels, its own brutal rules of supply and demand. The question was no longer about who had the most followers. The new question was starker and far more terrifying. What are you willing to do to prove you still exist? Any system, given enough time and enough disparate people, will develop a hierarchy. It's human nature. We can't help but organize, stratify, and monetize. The crude, pathetic service of the witnesses was the primordial ooze. Within a few months, it had evolved. It grew limbs and nervous system, and a predator's cold, calculating eyes. It was no longer a scattered collection of lonely people paying for a gaze. It was a business. They called it the attention exchange, and like any sophisticated market, it offered tiered pricing. The Bazzi tier, the entry-level product, was still the gaze. A silent observer for an hour, a day. It was cheap. Popular with the newly unemployed, the recently dumped, people experiencing a sudden, sharp drop in their perceived social altitude. But the gaze was a temporary fix, a methadone for the validation addict. It staved off the withdrawal, but it didn't provide the high. For that, you had to go to tier 2. The Echo. This was more expensive. It required more skill. The Echo wasn't just a passive observer. They were an active participant. For a negotiated fee, you could hire someone to be your friend for an afternoon. They would laugh at your jokes not too loudly. It had to feel authentic. They would listen, rapt, to your story about a workplace grievance, shaking their head in just the right way with the perfect blend of sympathy and outrage. They were actors, and their stage was your life. Their script was your ego. The brokers who ran these services were a new breed of criminal. They weren't thugs. They were sociologists, failed marketing executives, disgraced psychologists. They understood the product better than anyone. They knew the precise dosage of validation required to keep a client hooked. They held consultations in the hushed back rooms of libraries, in sterile, anonymous office spaces rented by the hour. Their language was that of a therapist, but their ledger was that of a drug lord. You'd sit across a metal desk from a man in a cheap suit, and he'd ask you questions. What's the core feeling you're looking to replicate? Is it the feeling of being admired by your peers or envied by your rivals? Are we looking for broad spectrum approval or a targeted, high-impact dose of intellectual respect? You'd answer, ashamed, whispering, and he'd nod, typing into a heavily encrypted laptop. Okay, for that, I recommend the Witty Colleague package. It's a 3-hour session. We have an Echo with a background in improv comedy. He'll meet you at a cafe. He will make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He'll even let you pay the bill to maintain the illusion of your own largesse. That will be $300. This is not a dystopian fantasy. This is a simple, brutal market correction. We had spent 2 decades receiving that service for free in exchange for our data. Now, we were simply paying for it in cash. The middleman had just changed, but the real money, the true dark heart of the attention exchange, was in tier 3. It was a service so coveted, so dangerous, and so psychologically potent that brokers only offered it to their most trusted, high-paying clients. They called it the ripple. The ripple was the simulation of social relevance. It wasn't about what people said to your face. It was about what they said behind your back. For a substantial fee, a broker would dispatch a team of echoes, not to interact with you, but to interact with each other about you. Imagine you're at a party, a real one, a clumsy, awkward gathering in this new, quiet world. And you overhear it. Two people you don't know, whispering by the drinks table. Is that him, the one who wrote that essay on post-digital architecture? I think so. I heard it was brilliant, devastating. You're him. You paid for that conversation. You paid for that rumor of your own importance to be seeded into the world. The ripple was the ultimate product, the carefully crafted illusion that you mattered even when you weren't in the room. It was the ghost of a viral tweet brought to life through whispered, choreographed lies. But a service this powerful creates its own risks. The echoes, the actors, they know your secrets. They know your deepest, most pathetic insecurities. They know you're repaying for friendship, for admiration, for relevance, and that knowledge is leverage. The stories started to trickle out on the dark nets. A client who tried to shortchange a broker only to have his friends publicly denounce him at his own birthday party. An actress who paid for a ripple of industry buzz only to be blackmailed by the very people she paid to whisper her name. The system was beginning to develop its own immune response, its own violent enforcement mechanisms. You're sitting there listening to this. Maybe you're thinking, this is sick. I would never. Are you sure? How many times have you checked to see who viewed your story? How many times have you deleted a photo because it didn't get enough likes? We were all addicts. We were all clients in waiting. The brokers knew this, and as they consolidated their power, forming guilds, fixing preces, their ambition grew. They were no longer content to just sell attention. They were starting to wonder if they could manufacture it from scratch. Why just create the illusion of an important person when they had the resources, the actors, and the desperate, hungry audience to create a real one? The age of the black market influencer was about to begin, and the first stars of this new dark firmament would not be born. They would be built. The attention exchange was a reactive market, serviced a pre-existing need. But true power doesn't service needs. It creates them. The syndicates, the shadowy consortiums of brokers that now controlled the global trade and validation, understood this. They were done selling a cure for the silence. They were ready to start composing the music that would play within it. It was the logical endpoint of late-stage capitalism meeting a species with a desperate, pathological need to be liked. And its first great creation was a man named Silas. You wouldn't have noticed him at first. Nobody did. That was the point. The first whispers about Silas were not loud. They were precise. Seated, an echo in a Kyoto tea house mentions an article he supposedly wrote. Two more, posing as art students in Berlin, argue about his philosophy of the new silence in a crowded U-Bahn station. A team in Buenos Aires ensures his name appears, scrawled as graffiti, in the background of a local news report about something completely unrelated. It was a campaign of manufactured mystique, a slow, methodical saturation of the global subconscious. There was no central source, no website to visit, no account to follow. There was just the growing, creeping feeling that you were the only person in your circle who hadn't heard of this brilliant, reclusive thinker. And who was Silas? He was nobody. A former dock worker from Lisbon, chosen for his unremarkable face and his quiet, malleable disposition. He was a blank canvas. The syndicates found him, vetted him, and made him an offer that a man with nothing to lose could never refuse. They gave him a new history, a new intellect, a new life. All he had to do in return was everything they said. This wasn't just a ripple. This was a tidal wave. The syndicates pooled their resources, deploying hundreds of echoes across dozens of cities. Their job was to build a ghost, a legend. They didn't promote Silas. They discovered him over and over again in seemingly organic, unrelated conversations. They argued his non-existent points. They praised his imaginary insights. Think of it as a political campaign. but the candidate is a personality, and the product is a feeling of being on the inside of something important. And you will hear the whispers too. You see the articles in the few remaining online magazines, the ones that still had journalistic credibility, written by reporters who were chasing the ghost they believed was real. The reporters were not on the payroll. They were just the final unwitting domino in a chain of perfectly executed social engineering. They were doing the syndicates work for free. You feel a pull, a curiosity. You want to know who this Silas is. The algorithm may be dead, but the one in your head, the one that craves patterns and narratives and social inclusion, is working just fine. The psychological horror of this new era wasn't just being unobserved. It was the gnawing paranoia that any observation you did receive might be a paid transaction. Is the person who just complimented your jacket a civilian or an echo running a script? Is that interesting conversation you just overheard at the bar a genuine moment, or a piece of staged theater for someone else's benefit? The social world, the real physical world, was becoming a minefield of potential artifice. Every interaction was suspect. Every new friendship required a background check you could never truly complete. But the most chilling part of the story isn't the effect on the public. It's the effect on Silas himself. Imagine being him. You wake up in a clean, minimalist apartment you didn't earn. You put on clothes chosen for you to fit the aesthetic. You are given books to carry, not to read. You are sent to a cafe with instructions to sit by the window and look thoughtful. You are a puppet, and you can feel the strings with every breath. The echoes are everywhere. They are the barista who nods at you with manufactured respect. They are the couple at the next table, loudly discussing your work. They are the person who accidentally bumps into you and apologizes with a starstruck stammer. Your entire reality is a stage populated by actors who know you are a fraud, and you must play your part every waking moment. Because if you break character, if you admit the truth, the entire scaffolding of your life and the multi-million-dollar investment that built it comes crashing down. His life is no longer his. It's a performance piece, and he is the only one who can't leave the theater. He's the first true celebrity of the Silent Age, and he's the loneliest man on earth. The syndicates had proven their thesis. They could create a person of immense social value out of thin air. They could manufacture a messiah. Silas was their proof of concept. And as his legend grew, a scalpelly actual unpaid humans started to discuss him, to seek him out, to treat him as a guru. Syndicates were already planning their next project, because if you can build a philosopher, you can build a political movement. If you can create a cult of personality, you can steer it. The silence hadn't ended the war for our attention. It had just driven it underground into the real world. And the new weapons weren't pixels and push notifications. They were people. The success of the Silas project was intoxicating for the syndicates. It was the thrill of creation. They had built a man from whispers, and the world had listened. But a single man, no matter how influential, is a fragile asset. A man can make a mistake. A man can have a conscience. A man can die. An idea, on the other hand, an idea is far more durable and far more profitable. The next product to emerge from the black market of the soul wasn't a person. It was a feeling packaged and sold as a movement. They called it Candor. On the surface, it was beautiful. A return to authenticity. A rejection of the curated artificial lives of the pre-silence era. Its followers, the Candids, practiced what they called unfiltered living. They spoke their minds bluntly and without apology. They rejected social niceties as a form of deception. They dressed simply. They gathered in public spaces, not to protest, but to engage in mass, unstructured conversations, to be, in their own words, aggressively real. But it was all a lie, a beautifully engineered, market-tested, 5-star lie. The Candor movement was born in a syndicate boardroom. Its core tenets focus grouped for maximum appeal to a population starved for genuine connection. It was the Silas project, but instead of one man, the product was an entire subculture. The initial push was an operational masterpiece. Teams of echoes trained in the Candor methodology were deployed. Their job was to perform authenticity. They would stage arguments in coffee shops, passionate, intellectually brutal debates that drew the attention of everyone around them. They would organize public telling circles where they would confess manufactured, heart-wrenching truths about their lives, inspiring real, paying civilians to do the same. They coined the phrases. They established the unbranded gray clothing. They were the architects of a social contagion. It was the ultimate cynical act, hiring actors to teach the world how to be real. And the world, desperate for anything to believe in, bought it completely. People who felt lost in the quiet, people who ached for the raw, tribal connection of the old online arguments, flocked to Candor. It gave them a script, it gave them a uniform, it gave them permission to be their worst, most unfiltered selves and call it enlightenment. But what about the echoes? The hundreds, the thousands of actors at the core of this deception. This is where the true, visceral horror of the system begins to fester. Being an echo for an afternoon, playing a friend, is one thing. Living a lie, 24/7 as a core member of an ideological movement, that requires a different level of commitment. It requires a part of you to die. A new psychological malady began to spread through the ranks of the exchange. They called it script bleed. It's the subtle, terrifying erosion of the self that happens when you perform a role for too long. An echo, a man paid to be a fervent candid, would come home to his family and be unable to switch off the persona. He would speak to his wife with the brutal, unfiltered honesty of the movement, telling her precisely what he thought of her cooking, her new haircut, her anxieties. He would critique his children's drawings with a cold, detached logic. The persona, the one that earned him his paycheck, was devouring the man he used to be. He was an actor who had forgotten he was on a stage. His home was his new audience, and they had not consented to the performance. You think you're immune to that? Remember crafting the perfect, angry comment in a political argument online. The careful choice of words, the satisfying rhythm of a devastating you were rehearsing, weren't you? Practicing a version of yourself. Now imagine doing that for a living, with your whole body in the real world. Imagine having to believe it just a little to make it convincing. How long before the mask fuses to your skin? The syndicates saw script bleed not as a crisis, but as an unforeseen benefit. Echoes who were losing themselves were more committed, more believable. They were no longer just acting. They were converting, but they missed the real danger. They had designed the Candor movement to be a controllable asset, a cultural temperature they could raise or lower to suit their clients' needs. A corporation wants to crush a smaller rival, deploy candidates to have loud, authentic conversations in cafes about the rival's unethical practices. A political party wants to discredit an opponent, seed the movement with whispers about their inauthenticity. They thought they were the puppet masters. They failed to understand the most basic rule of fire. Once it grows large enough, it no longer cares who lit the match. The movement was now real believers, swept up in the fabricated groundswell, now outnumbered the paid echoes 100-1, and even more terrifyingly, the echoes themselves, deep in the throes of script bleed, were becoming the most zealous, unpredictable zealots of all. They had been paid to start a religion and had accidentally become its first true disciples. The syndicates were losing control. Their beautiful, controllable asset was developing a mind of its own. It was a ghost they had summoned, and it was beginning to speak in a voice they didn't recognize, demanding a sacrifice they were not prepared to make. The syndicates had a word for it: inversion. It's what happens when a product consumes the market, when a tool turns on its user, when a cure becomes the disease. The Candor movement was no longer a controllable asset. It had become a self-replicating social virus, and its primary symptom was a violent, puritanical rage. The age of the unmasking had begun, and it was a form of public execution. It would happen without warning. You'd be sitting in a park, on a train, in a quiet office. A group of candidates identifiable by their drab gray clothing and the unnerving focus in their eyes would approach. They would form a circle around you. There were no cameras, no phones, just eyes. A dozen pairs of eyes, all locked onto you with the intensity of a predator. And then one of them would speak. "We see you." It was the movement's liturgical phrase, and it was the beginning of a social vivisection. They would deconstruct you, piece by piece, right there in public. They would call out your branded shoes as a sign of vanity. They would question the way you smiled at the barista as a calculated act of social manipulation. They would analyze your posture, your word choice, your very presence as evidence of your inauthenticity. They weren't always wrong. That was the most brutal part. They were holding up a black mirror to the small, necessary lies we all tell to function in a society, and they were demanding you confess, right there in front of your peers, your neighbors, your children. Confess to the crime of being a normal, flawed, socially adapted human being. There was no defense. To argue was to be defensive, a sign of a fragile ego. To stay silent was to admit guilt. The only way out was through a ritual of forced public acceptance, to agree with them, to amplify their accusations, to thank them for helping you see your own deception. The psychological toll was catastrophic. People lost their jobs, marriages ended, the suicide rate for the first time since the Great Correction began to climb. This was the inversion. The syndicates had built a movement to service the insecure elites who could afford their products. Now, that movement was devouring their client base. It was a marketing campaign that had declared war on its own creators. In the encrypted, high-altitude boardrooms of the syndicates, there was panic. They had created a monster they could not control and could not kill. You could not assassinate an idea. And the Candor movement was now more idea than organization. So they decided to fight fire with fire, to fight a lie with a better lie. It was codenamed Operation Mimesis. The logic was simple and deeply cynical. If Candor's power came from its perceived authenticity, they would have to create something that felt even more authentic. A counter movement, something warmer, more forgiving, more human. A movement based on empathy, storytelling, and the shared beauty of our noble failures and beautiful masks. They would sell the world the comforting lie that our lies are what make us beautiful. But to launch it, they needed their best soldiers, their most experienced, most deeply embedded echoes, the ones who were already inside Candor, the ones suffering from the worst cases of script bleed. Imagine you are one of them. You're a high-level echo. For months, you have lived and breathed Candor. You were paid to believe, and you did your job so well that you can no longer tell where the script ends and you begin. The brutal logic of the movement is the only thing that makes sense in this quiet, empty world. It is your identity. It is your religion. Then, one night, the burner phone they gave you, a relic of a bygone era, a single encrypted message appears. A new directive from a master you haven't heard from in months. Mimesis protocol, Candor is compromised. Your new objective, dismantle the movement from within. Frame its leaders. Expose its hypocrisy. Await instructions. The message is a psychological bomb. The gods you were paid to worship have just been declared false. The truth you have been evangelizing has just been rebranded as a lie. And you, their most fervent apostle, are now being ordered to become their Judas. What to do? Do. If you obey, you have to betray every relationship you've built. You have to systematically destroy the only social structure that has given you meaning. You have to look into the eyes of true believers people you yourself converted in, lie to them, manipulate them, and ultimately break them. You have to perform an act of supreme inauthenticity, a betrayal so profound it will shatter your already fragile sense of self. But if you refuse, you are a rogue asset. You know, the syndicate's secrets, the names of their operatives. You are not just a liability, you are a threat. And the syndicates, for all their psychological sophistication, are still a criminal enterprise. They have ways of dealing with threats that are brutally, viscerally real. You are standing in the center of a war you didn't know you were fighting. A war between two fabricated realities, both designed by the same faceless men in a distant boardroom. The silence of the world outside is nothing compared to the screaming in your own head. This is the precipice. The moment the black market for attention turns into a real physical war fought with whispers, reputations, and staged betrayals. The first shots will not be fired by guns, but by words. And you have just been ordered to fire the first one. The burner phone in your hand is no longer a piece of technology. It's a holy relic from a dead religion, and it has just spoken heresy. You don't delete the message, You can't. Your thumb hovers over the button, but you are... To erase the words would be an act of defiance, and your body, conditioned by years of obedience to faceless masters, refuses the command. To keep them is to hold the evidence of your own damnation. So you just stare. The screen glows, illuminating a face you no longer recognize in the dark. This is the moment the simulation becomes the reality. The game board has been flipped, and you are no longer a playing piece. You are the board itself, and two opposing armies are currently trying to tear you in half. The next day, you walk into a Candor gathering, and the world is a hall of mirrors. The faces you see are the same ones you saw yesterday. The drab gray clothing is the same. The earnest, intense conversations are the same, but everything is different. You are now a spy in your own church. Your friend, a Laritha woman you personally guided into the movement, the one whose tearful confession in a telling circle felt so real it almost made you believe she smiles at you. Is it a real smile, or did she get the message to... Is her smile a test? Silent question. Are you with me, or are you my target? A man you know only as Marcus of Firebrand, whose unfiltered speeches have made him a rising star in the local chapter, puts a hand on your shoulder. You're quiet today, he says, his gaze penetrating. Clarity of thought, I hope. Is he concerned, or is he probing your defenses? Is he a loyalist, sniffing out the traitor? Or is he your handler for this new, insane mission? You can't ask. To ask is to reveal your hand. To trust anyone is to risk your life. Because, with a certainty that settles like ice in your gut, what happens to rogue assets? The syndicates are not an HR department. They don't issue pink slips. They are the architects of social reality, and they can unwrite you just as easily as they wrote Silas. It would start with a ripple of whispers, accusing you of the one unforgivable sin, being a paid actor. An echo. Then a staged unmasking, led by their most effective, most brutal operatives. Your social circle would evaporate. Your family would be fed evidence of your deception. You would be a pariah, a ghost haunting a world that no longer believed you were real. And if that didn't work, if you knew too much, syndicates also had contacts in older, more traditional black markets. The kind where problems don't get erased, they just disappear. So you obey, you have to. Survival is the oldest, most authentic instinct of all. Your burner phone vibrates again. Another message. It isn't a conversation. It's an order. A name is Alara. The target is Alara, the woman you mentored, the true believer. Your directive is precise. Under my understanding, use her sincerity as a weapon against her. Frame her passion as a performance of purity. Isolate, discredit. The syndicate is testing you. They've given you the one target that will cause the maximum amount of psychological damage to you. They need to know if you have broken completely. If you are still their tool, you find her later, talking to a group of new recruits. Her face is alive, glowing with the fervor of the newly converted. She speaks of the beauty of truth, the freedom of dropping the masks. She is the perfect embodiment of the lie you were paid to create. She is your masterpiece, and now you have to sign your name by shattering it. You approach the circle, you wait for a pause, and you begin the performance. Alara, you say, your voice calm, measured. The voice of a concerned mentor. Your passion is inspiring. Truly, she beams at you. It's a knife in your stomach. But you continue letting the word hang in the air, a drop of poison. I have to ask, in the spirit of absolute candor, does it ever feel rehearsed? This level of purity, this constancy, unwavering certainty. Is it a state of being, or is it a role you have perfected for the benefit of others? The silence that follows is absolute. The recruits look from you to her. You haven't accused her of a crime. You have done something far more insidious. You have used the very language of her faith to declare her a heretic. You have unmasked her, not for a lie, but for the possibility that her truth is too perfect. You watch the light in Alara's eyes flicker and die. You see the confusion, the hurt, the sudden, sickening doubt that blossoms on her face. She opens her mouth to respond, but there is no response. You have trapped her in a logical paradox from which there is no escape. You have done your job. You have proven your loyalty. And as you walk away from the wreckage of a human soul, the high-pitched whine in your head is gone. It has been replaced by a dead, flat silence. The sound of a wire that is finally, irrevocably snapped. The snap wasn't a breakdown. You see that now. It was a calibration. The grief, the guilt, the fear, those were inefficient legacy emotions from a previous operating system. When the wire broke, they were purged. The dead, flat silence that remained wasn't an emptiness. It was a space, a clean, white, sterile room where you could finally think clearly. You are no longer a person. You are an instrument honed to a purpose. You are a scalpel in a world of blunt objects, and for the first time in your life, you feel a sense of profound, terrifying peace. Your handlers at the syndicate notice the change immediately. Your reports become concise, clinical, and devastatingly effective. There is no more hesitation, no more moral friction. You no longer need to be told how to dismantle a target. You only need to be given a name. You see the source code of human insecurity now. You can read the hidden vulnerabilities in a person's posture, the subtle tells of their deepest fears in their choice of words. You were paid to be an actor, but you have evolved into a sociologist of ruin. Alara was a test, a clumsy, brutal initiation. Now, the real work begins. Your mission is no longer to discredit individuals. It is to break the spine of the Candor movement itself, to turn the church against its own scripture. To orchestrate a system, you become a whisper in the machine. You don't lead meetings. You shape them from the back of the room with a single, perfectly timed question. You don't make accusations. You plant the seeds of doubt and let the movement's own paranoid puritanism do the work for you. You have become a master of semantic warfare. The centerpiece of your campaign is a large, regional Candor gathering in a repurposed warehouse. 500 true believers, all buzzing with the aggressive certainty you helped manufacture. You are not on the stage. You are just a face in the crowd. But you, and a dozen other calibrated assets like you, are about to bring the temple down. You begin the attack not with a bang, but with a question, delivered during a Q&A with a high-level candid leader. A question of pure ideological poison. Brother, you begin, your voice full of manufactured sincerity. We have all embraced the liberation of being unfiltered. But I must ask, have we considered that the desire to be seen as unfiltered is itself the most complex and insidious filter of all? Are we truly authentic, or are we just performing a new, more demanding version of authenticity for each other? The bomb has been deployed. The room falls silent. The leader on stage fumbles for an answer, but there isn't one. The question is a snake eating its own tail. It uses the movement's core value of the rejection of performance to accuse the movement itself of being the ultimate performance. Another asset across the room builds on your attack. In this uniform, she says, gesturing to her own gray clothes, was it a spontaneous expression of collective will, or was it a trend we adopted to signal our inclusion in the group? What is the authentic way to signal authenticity? It spreads a fire in a dry forest. The believers, trained for months to be hypervigilant to any hint of inauthenticity, now turn that weapon on each other. The room descends into a vicious, intellectual civil war. Factions form in minutes. The originalists, who cling to the early tenet, the purifiers, who believe the movement has already been corrupted by ego, the transcendents, who argue for a new, even more radical form of honesty. They are tearing each other apart. Accusations of performative candor and aesthetic sincerity fly like shrapnel. Friendships shatter. Alliances crumble. You stand back and watch the beautiful, horrific spectacle. You feel like a composer listening to a symphony written in the key of human frailty, and you feel a surge of something you haven't felt in a long time. It isn't joy, it isn't pride, it's the cold, clean satisfaction of a complex equation resolving to zero, the perfect execution of a function. Have you ever won an argument online? Not just made your point, but truly, systematically dismantled someone else's reality until they were left with nothing. Do you remember that little surge of cold, clean victory? That feeling of rightness, of order restored, of your own intellectual superiority confirmed. Now imagine that feeling is your job, your purpose, your entire world. You walk out of the warehouse as the shouting escalates behind you, the sound of your creation devouring itself. Your burner phone vibrates. It's a message from the syndicate. Just one word. Beautiful. You look at the word, and for the first time, you don't feel like a servant receiving praise. You feel like an artist receiving a critique from a less talented peer. They think they are your masters. They think they built you. They have no idea what they've truly unleashed. They taught you how to find the flaws in any system, how to identify the single point of failure in any structure, human or ideological. And as you stand there in the quiet dark, you find yourself thinking about the syndicate itself, a system, a structure, and you begin with your new cold, perfect clarity to search for the cracks. You were a weapon. Now, you are a strategist. The syndicates gave you a target list. First, Silas, then but a truly intelligent weapon doesn't just follow orders. It studies its user. It learns their tactics, their weaknesses, their ultimate objectives, and it asks a simple, terrifying question: what happens when the target list runs out? The peace you felt was the peace of the void, but a void is not a sustainable state. It must be filled. Your purge of emotion left a vacuum, and into that vacuum, a new, cold ambition is beginning to crystallize. You have been a ghost, a whisper, a scalpel, but the scalpel is beginning to dream of being the surgeon. Your work dismantling Candor provides the perfect cover. The movement, now fractured into a dozen warring schisms, is your laboratory. You are an epidemiologist of belief, studying how ideologies mutate and die. You submit your reports to the syndicate, detailing the chaos you've orchestrated. But the reports are incomplete. You omit the most important data. You are building your own asset list. As you move through the wreckage of the movement, you are not just a saboteur. You are a recruiter. You identify the other echoes who have made the same evolutionary leap as you, the ones who have gone through the fire of script bleeding come out the other side, not broken, but sharpened. You can see it in their eyes, the same clean, sterile calm, the same chilling, analytical gaze. You don't approach them with a grand speech that would be crude, inauthentic. You approach them as a fellow survivor, a shared, knowing glance in the ruins of a movement you both helped to kill. A single encrypted message sent from a new burner phone, one the syndicate doesn't know about. The message is simple. Not a statement, but a question. A seed. Who writes the script? It's the only question that matters now. For years, you have been actors. But who are the playwrights? Who are the faceless men in the boardrooms? Who pull the strings? You realize with your new cold clarity that the syndicates have the same vulnerability as the systems they create. They are built on a lie, the lie of their own invisibility. You start to build a network, a ghost organization of calibrated assets woven into the very fabric of the syndicate's operations. You are the perfect Trojan horse. They see you as their most effective tool, and all the while, you are mapping their infrastructure, identifying their key personnel, learning the architecture of their power. The psychological horror has inverted once more. It is no longer about the fear of being observed by a machine. It is the fear of being an unobserved, unconstrained intelligence inside the machine. You have achieved a state of pure agency in a world designed to strip it away. You have no identity, no history, no emotional attachments. You are nothing but pure tactical wall. And in a world of broken, needy, validation-hungry people, that makes you a god. Think about it. The ultimate freedom to be completely untethered from the need for approval, to see every social interaction not as a source of anxiety or connection, but as a set of variables to be manipulated, to have no self to betray, no ego to wound. Don't you feel a flicker of envy? A dark, secret desire for that kind of power? Your moment comes during the syndicate's most audacious project yet, the creation of a new global financial panic. designed to enrich a select group of their most elite clients. It's a massive operation involving hundreds of echoes in a complex, multi-layered campaign of disinformation, a symphony of manufactured fear. You are a key player. Your job is to orchestrate a series of high-profile, staged bankruptcies, using your network of assets to create a ripple of financial terror that will cascade through the fragile post-silence economy. The syndicate trusts you. They give you access to core operational data, names, accounts, communication logs. They see it as a sign of your elevated status. They don't realize they are handing you the keys to the kingdom. On the night before the operation is set to launch, you are sitting in a small, anonymous apartment. It is your command center. Around you, half a dozen of your fellow calibrated assets are working in silent, perfect coordination. You are not dismantling the syndicate's operation. You are hijacking it. With surgical precision, you begin to alter the code. A few lines here, a few data packets rerouted there. The targets are no longer the ones the syndicate chose. The beneficiaries are no longer their clients. You are not a revolutionary. You are not trying to burn down the system for the good of humanity. That would be an emotional, irrational act. This is simpler. It is a corporate takeover, a change of management. The new targets are the syndicates themselves, their shell corporations, their hidden accounts, their personal assets. You're about to use the weapon they built to systematically gut them from the inside out, redirecting their own manufactured panic to erase their wealth and expose their leadership. The final command is ready. You look at the screen, at the elegant, intricate web of deception you have woven inside their own. There is no hesitation, no fear, no rush of adrenaline. There is only the clean, quiet hum of a perfectly executed function. The old world was destroyed by a thirst for validation. The new world was built on a black market of the soul. But the world that is about to be born, the one you are creating with a single keystroke, will be run on a new currency altogether. Not attention, not money, pure, cold, unfeeling control. You press the button, and for the syndicates, the masters of the universe, the men who thought they were invisible, the unmasking begins. The world doesn't end in fire or ice. It ends in a single, silent transaction. For the men who called themselves the syndicates, the end came not as a bang, but as a series of quiet, digital impossibilities. A bank transfer that would not execute, a trusted subordinate who was suddenly unreachable, a keycard that no longer opened a door. They were gods who had woken up to find their names had been erased from their own holy books. They tried to fight back. Of course they did. They were predators. And a cornered predator is a desperate, vicious thing. They tried to deploy their assets to create ripples of chaos against the anonymous entity gutting them from within. But they were issuing commands on a network that was no longer theirs. Imagine screaming orders into a dead telephone while through the window you watch your own army calmly and methodically dismantling your house brick by brick. Their own weapons were turned against them with a beautiful, poetic cruelty. Echoes they had trained were used to seed rumors of their downfall, accelerating the panic. Unmaskings were staged not by angry candids, but by your calibrated assets, exposing the syndicate leaders by name in public squares. They were hunted not by police, but by the very social phantoms they had created. They were ghosts being exorcised by their own creations. And you watched the fall of your creators from a place of perfect, cold serenity. There was no triumph. There was no revenge. Those are emotional concepts, and you have shed them like a useless skin. This was simply the final step in a logical process. Triage, you didn't destroy the system. That would be wasteful. You acquired it. The black market for attention, the global network of echoes, the entire apparatus of manufactured reality, it is all still there. It is simply under new management. Your management. The financial panic you triggered was not an act of anarchy. It was a recalibration, a controlled burn. Wealth was not destroyed. It was power was not eliminated. It was consolidated. The world still needs its whispers, its trends, its heroes and villains. People still ache for something to believe in, someone to admire, someone to hate. The demand for a script has not gone away, and you are now the sole supplier. The warring factions of Candor were allowed to burn themselves out, replaced by the gentle, therapeutic hum of the mimesis movement you were ordered to create. A movement you now control completely. You give people the comfort of noble failures and beautiful masks, a soothing balm for their anxieties, while you quietly direct their conversations, their consumption, their political leanings. You have become the benevolent, invisible god of a world that is addicted to stories. The psychological horror is now complete. Not the horror of being watched, but the horror of living in a world where every single seemingly organic thought, every shared laugh, every viral idea might be a line of code in your grand simulation. The horror is that the silence was never a cure. It was just a space for a new, more perfect form of control to be installed. You sit at the apex of a silent, invisible pyramid. You are the ultimate observer, the final audience. There is no one above you to validate you, to watch you, to give your existence meaning. You have achieved the very thing the rest of the world is paying to avoid, a state of complete and total unobservation. And in that perfect, sterile silence, in the clean, white room of your own consciousness, a new question begins to form. A tiny, illogical, and utterly terrifying variable in your perfect equation. It's been a long time since you felt anything. You purged all that, but as you watch your flawless machine operate, as you see billions of people living out the narratives you've written for them, you feel the ghost of a feeling, the phantom limb of a discarded emotion. What is it? Loneliness? Boredom? Or is it something else? Is it the dawning, horrifying realization that the perfect, all-seeing, all-controlling God is just another performer, and that his only audience is himself? The world is quiet now, quieter than it's ever been. The frantic, chaotic noise of billions of voices shouting for attention has been replaced by a single, unified, harmonious symphony. A beautiful, elegant, and completely artificial song. You're sitting there in your room. It's late. You can hear the sounds of your own quiet life around you. And you are, for this one brief moment, unobserved. Your thoughts are your own. Your feelings are real. Cherish that feeling, because in the new silence, in the world that was born from the ashes of our own desperate need to be seen, that is the only real black market left, and its price is everything. Welcome to the real silence.